Welcome to the first meeting of this particular year of the Orange County Historical Society. My name is Stephanie George. Chris Jepson, who is our president, is not here tonight. He's ill. But I and our new vice president, Mike Kluwer, are going to do some introductions and talk about some of the business issues we have this evening before we start on our program. If you have not become a member yet, or you wish to become a member, we do have membership little envelopes in the back. It's $30 for the entire year. We have all kinds, it allows you to get a newsletter of what we're doing, first dibs on all kinds of field trips, our annual dinner, special events. So I really encourage you to become a member. The other thing I wanted to mention very briefly is the first field trip that we have coming up in October is a trip to Little Saigon. Now, if you haven't been to Little Saigon, this will be your immersive opportunity to go. It's a bus trip. We're going to at least 4 different locations where there'll be interpretive talks discussing immigration, resettlement, what Garden Grove used to look like. We're going to talk about commerce and businesses. We're going to stop at one of the Buddhist temples there, talk about religion. We're going to the Asian Garden Mall. Moran Street, if you're not familiar with that, that was kind of the hub of where all the Vietnamese newspapers were, and they were pushing information out to the Vietnamese American community, as well as lunch at a Vietnamese restaurant. And we'll be talking about the foods that we're eating, as well as clothing. So this is going to be a really nice thing. If you don't know already, this is the 50th anniversary of Vietnamese resettlement in Orange County. And we have the largest Vietnamese population outside of Saigon. So I think this will be a really interesting and fabulous opportunity for everybody. Seats are limited though, so I encourage you to sign up. For both of those, if you sign up this evening, you can either pay on our website or write a check or pay cash, and all of that can be dropped off in the back with Aida, and she'll be helping with accepting membership and using your credit card if you wish. So, and with that, I will let Mike introduce our speaker.
And to make it feel like a real field trip, we made sure to rent those really ugly, uncomfortable yellow buses. No, just kidding. They're regular buses. Anyway, tonight we have Nate Jackson, who's going to be talking to you about punk rock in Orange County. He's the co-author of "Tearing Down the Orange Curtain: How Punk Rock Brought Orange County to the World" with fellow journalist Daniel Kohn. The book explores the trajectory of punk from ska to punk and ska from their humble beginnings to their peak popularity years when their cultural impact was felt around the world. Delving deep into the personal and professional lives of bands like Social Distortion, the Adolescents, the Offspring, and their ska counterparts. No doubt, there's one I know. Sublime, Real Big Fish, Save Ferris, that one I know too, and more. This book gives readers a deeper look into the very human stories of these musicians, many of whom struggle with acceptance, addictions, and sometimes brutal teenage years. Jackson was born in Orange County and came up in the local punk scene, playing in bands, and rumbling through the mosh pit and warehouses, DIY venues, and clubs throughout Southern California. He's currently the deputy editor of entertainment at the LA Times. He was previously the music editor for OC Weekly and staff writer for the Times. Please give a warm welcome to Nate Jackson.
Awesome. Thank you for that intro. My mom was proud of that. Hey everybody, my name's Nate. As was mentioned, I co-wrote a book called Tearing Down the Orange Curtain. And I wanted to start off by just saying, how many people are fans of OC Punk in this room? I can kind of tell. Wow. That's more than I was expecting, honestly. I was not sure what to expect when I came tonight, so I was just kind of like, hey, let's just be here and enjoy whatever happens, which is about as punk rock as you can get. You just let it go, So for me, growing up in Fullerton, punk rock was sort of the backdrop to my life since I can remember. And as you might note from some of the bands who are on the cover of this book, Social Distortion, Offspring, No Doubt, Sublime, these are bands that most of the entire world knows. If you've been on trips, traveling, you see t-shirts of these bands everywhere. You hear their music in the subways, you hear it, in wherever, offices and random shops and stuff all over the world. You got a T.S. Wells shirt right here in the front. You got decades upon decades of fans who embrace this music, who love it, who know everything about it, but to an extent that where it comes from and where it started and how it evolved, even as someone who grew up here, I felt like I was missing a lot of that history until I became a journalist and started writing for the OC Weekly, became a music editor there. I was there for 8 years. And to me, the biggest thing about it was the sound and how it made me feel. And I would guess that most of the people here that are here because of the music has some kind of emotional tie when they hear, Kids at the Black Hole, or they hear, anything from the Offspring, Smash, or it could be something, from the Adolescents. It just brings back some memories that you can't really place. And so for me, that was a big reason why I wrote this book, or wanted to write it, because there was no book out there literally about the Orange County punk scene, which sounded weird when I sat down with my co-author and we were like, has anyone done this before? Literally, has anyone written about some of the biggest bands in the world who came from this place? And we looked a lot. We looked, and again, it was like there was no organized document that kind of showed this from the ground up. And so we thought, okay, as two journalists who love this music, who grew up with it, who are too young to even be a part of it, really, honestly. We were decade plus beyond a lot of the bands that we talk about in this book in terms of when they came around. I mean, in my case, I'm 39, so, it's, to me, something that I kind of came up looking at from above as second, third, fourth generation. And, but I saw so many talented writers, so many great creative people who were in the scene there from the beginning that could have written this book, and, it just didn't happen for whatever reason, And one thing that punk taught me was that you can't wait around, So for that sake and for the purpose of being able to talk about a lot of these bands, talk about people like Steve Soto from the Adolescents, or Jack Grisham from TSOL, or Mike Ness and his story. For me, it was you cannot wait for these guys to write it themselves. In a lot of cases, sadly, many of them have passed on. So for me and Dan, we just said it's just about trying to be sort of like the keepers of the torch in the way of just trying to be able to educate people who are younger than us and hopefully give some nostalgia to people who are older than us about this scene that means so much to so many people. And then I wanted to also, since we're all here talking, we're all friends, maybe some shout outs, some concerts you went to that are or a band that you really love that sparked some interest in you early on in the punk scene. X, okay. They're LA, but we're close. They're awesome. John Doe was interviewed in this book, so I love him. And okay.
It's Offspring at the Whiskey in '95.
Okay, so they were exploding at that point.
Yeah, it was a K-Rock free ticket type thing. Yeah.
Okay. I hope you still have that ticket.
Offspring, and I'll raise you Offspring up in Gilman at Berkeley.
See, there we go. Because we talk about Gilman in the book, even though it is up north, because Offspring, though they are OC darlings, could not get a show to save their life when they were actually living here in Garden Grove. They were pretty obscure for about 11 years. Like, nobody really knew who they were down here, partly because there was no venues at the time when they were coming up in the mid-'80s, which is a little bit after the origin period we start off with the book. So they had to, again, not wait around. They had to figure out a way to get some gigs, get some chances to get up in front of people and work out their songs. And the way they did that was to drive up, 9 hours or whatever to Berkeley and play at Gilman Street for a bunch of kids who had a venue that was basically like a for kids, by kids type of situation. And one of the main themes that comes across throughout this book is that. And that's why punk does still resonate, and that's why you'll still see kids who are like way too young to even know anything about this music still rocking the t-shirts, listening to the music, because it's a youth-centric movement. And you can carry that with you your entire life, but it'll still come up back behind you because of that spirit that is ingrained in the sound of four-chord fury of kids who just found guitars and decided to start playing that weekend. And that is kind of the essence of the book, what drove me to want to play music myself, and what keeps me involved in this today, enough to pound out 400 pages of pure text, very few photos in this. But anyways, I wanted to also shout out not just the bands in this book, but also the people that help the scene run behind the scenes, because really, this book is about all of them too. Can we shout out some venues that may have been important to Orange County Punk? Doll Hut. Yeah, there we go. Hey, that's my generation. This is good. Yeah. What's that? Club Mesa. Yep. Became Detroit Bar. It's like, how many lives have some of these clubs had? It's like Club Mesa, Detroit Bar, Wayfarer. It's like, you see the evolution of it throughout history. But yeah, exactly. These are venues that were safe havens, that were incubators, that were taught a lot of the early bands and fans lessons in life and business, which is, look at the fine print and make sure you get your money at the end of the night, if you're a band. And also to learn how to be within a scene and to evolve and to kind of learn how to grow your sound based on what you're seeing out there in the crowd and what's getting reception, reaction, chain reaction. There you go, call back. What's one more venue I might be looking for if I were to be talking? What's that? Cuckoo's Nest, yeah, you guys.
Galaxy?
We'll start at Cuckoo's Nest. So that's like chapter 1 in the book, literally called The Nest, and is in Costa Mesa at 1714 Placentia Avenue. It's a building that no longer exists to the naked eye, but if you still type in that address on your phones, there's a good chance that the location will pop up Cuckoo's Nest, even though it hasn't been there in God knows how long. And the reason why we talk about that venue in particular was because in 1979 it was like basically the major hub of where OC Punk really started, with bands like The Vandals, Adolescents, Agent Orange, TSOL. All of these bands got a chance to really get their sound and become something to a bunch of kids, basically to their friends, become this movement that, again, felt super immediate. No one could have predicted it, but as soon as it came around, everybody wanted to be on it. And that kind of was the kickstarting force of what became, 40 years of Orange County Punk. Does anyone know the owner of the Cuckoo's Nest name? Got the last name, yeah? Jerry Roach, yep. So we talked to Jerry. Jerry was one of the first people we talked to for this book. He was kind of like, what the hell are you doing on my property? Why are you talking to me? You weren't even born. Like, why are you doing this book about this? But, Jerry is actually one of the people that represents something really important about this book, which is the adult in the room who needed to take a chance on a bunch of kids to do something that was not very financially smart and probably, it definitely was majorly disastrous in a way, because all of the different things that happen with punk are unpredictable, especially at the start when no one really knew what to call it, and no one really knew what it was. It was not really given that name punk until like the media sort of like turned it into that, and like, terms like moshing or slam dancing, all these things didn't even have names when he opened his doors up to all of these kids who just wanted a place to play. And he was happy to let them play because they actually packed his bar, which before it became the Cuckoo's Nest, it was, before that it was called Finnegan's, I believe. It was a rock club that he had basically inherited as collateral on a business sale. He was a realtor before he got into becoming a bar owner. And so he tried to run this club in Costa Mesa like a regular bar that you would in the 70s, just kind of like a cover band, Saturday night, boy meets girl, sort of like people drink and dance and whatever. It's kind of basic, but it sucked. It was failing very badly, to the point where he was desperate to kind of take on anybody that would bring a crowd of people to the venue and hopefully, pay for tickets, maybe buy a drink or something. But the problem was that these kids that wanted to play were all underage. They were all, 15, 16, 17-year-old, and kids from high school. They're like, hey, let us play. And he kept telling them, get out of here. Like, I don't want to deal with you. You come back when you're 21, essentially. But eventually, because business was so bad, he was like, fine. He took a chance on a band called The Crowd from Huntington Beach. Has anyone heard of The Crowd? Okay, all right. It's okay, you can raise your hand, you can call out, you can, just shout at me, it's fine. This is kind of a punk rock book experience right here, so you guys can do whatever you want. So essentially that band that I mentioned, The Crowd, were a group of kids from Edison High School that were, a couple of them were brothers, and you had a very unique sound that they were making that other bands were kind of making in their own way too, but they were kind of one of the first catalyst bands to really kind of have the max aggression with like little fast-paced sounds, but they were kind of they were called Dayglow. They were more like upbeat, kind of like happier version of what we're talking about, versus like maybe TSOL, which may be a little angrier, a little bit darker, right? But they, the first weekend they played at the Nest, brought a massive crowd. I guess it's in the name. So at that point, Jerry Roach, being, a businessman, looked at what was in front of him, a bunch of kids basically tearing up his bar, and say, I think I like this. I think I want to get into business. I think I want to get into the punk rock business. And so he said, well, can you come back? And they did. And they kept coming back. And other bands joined the fray of this as well. So like I said, you had bands like the Vandals, and you had other bands that were kind of like adjacent to the punk rock scene. There were bands like the Earwigs that played. You had UXA, Suburban Lawns. I'm tossing out a bunch of names that you guys may or may not care about. But the point is that this scene was forming in this bar that was kind of coming out of necessity for something that was just not working before. And Jerry found a way to say, hey, I can make money on this, at least somewhat, enough to keep the doors open. They never really made money. I mean, he might have made some money. The bands didn't really make any money, but it was the catalyst of what became the punk scene. So that's kind of where our book starts, around 1978, 1979 in there. We give a little bit of context before to kind of help let people know like what Orange County is, because I'm guessing most people are from here, but when you talk about Orange County to people who are not from here, what do they normally think of when they think of Orange County? Yep. Or Disneyland, Reagan, the beach. Real Housewives, right? Yeah, the OC. If you're from like my age range, like I was sure that was the bane of my existence, because everyone thought I lived on the Bluffs. I'm like, no, I live in Fullerton. It's not. You know. So it was to me looking at that as a way to, and this is the book, you know, the title of the book is Tearing Down the Orange Curtain. That orange curtain title, you know exactly, you know, when you started hearing that and in the context, you heard it. And in general, it was not positive. And that's one thing that we talk about in the book is how that term sort of coalesced and coincided with what was going on in the punk scene, and how battling against that term meant not only starting a scene where you're from, but also being able to take it elsewhere, take it out of the suburbs. And that wasn't always successfully done. There's plenty of periods of bands that just never really made it never really made it out of Orange County, but their sound and a lot of their music did after them. Talking about a band called the Adolescents. How many people know the Blue Album? Okay, all right. And so that original lineup of the Adolescents never actually made it out of Southern California, even though you can go anywhere in the country and probably find someone with an Adolescents t-shirt that's like a totally blue t-shirt with like the red letters or the black whatever lettering they have on there. And their music is beloved around the world. But that first album was recorded in about 12 hours. And the kids that recorded it were very drunk. And they were not actually trying that hard to play that well. But those songs that they played were masterpieces, actually, which is kind of astonishing considering how people revere an album like that. And so we get into the sort of the process of how a band like the Adolescents formed. Again, you have the Agnew brothers. Family relationships in Orange County is an ongoing theme in this. I myself come from a large family. I was the only one that really played music, but there was many examples of families in Orange County that had siblings that played in bands together in garages because they had them. You know, like you couldn't really have a garage band without a garage. There you go. And so we talk about that and like how family relationships kind of built into something that became a chemistry that kind of turned into a sound. So a lot of people when they think about Orange County punk, it's a melodic sound. It's a very kind of catchy, kind of octave-driven, I'm talking to the musicians in the room, octave-driven guitar sound that a lot of people wound up emulating in punk rock across the world. But, you know, it started in cities like Fullerton, again, bringing up the Adolescents, bringing up Agent Orange. This sound that was catchy, but it was aggressive. It had spirit, but it also didn't take itself too seriously. Band like the Vandals, which is, you hear it in the name, essentially. They were, didn't quite care what people thought about them. And they were really kind of the inventors of what we think of as pop punk today. You know, your Blink-182s, your Good Charlottes, for better or worse. You know, I feel like these are the bands that a lot of people ascribe to when they think of a certain sound that feels like Southern California. Really what they're talking about is these bands. So we talk about them and their early development. We talk about how, like, not only were they unique for their time, but they were unique way beyond their time. And people are still emulating them today, which is hard to believe considering how much hate a lot of them got. And I think if you listen to anyone like Mike Ness, who goes up on stage and says it wasn't always cool to be punk, I mean, he's the guy who would know. And Mike actually wrote the foreword for our book. He was one of the first people that we talked to, Mike Ness from Social Distortion. And I think one of the things that he realized early on was that punk rock was made for people who just don't do rules. And don't really take kindly to people telling them which way to do anything. So, you know, that stemmed from a life that most people would think was very un-OC, which is like, you know, poverty, broken homes, alcoholism, drug addiction. A lot of that redemption story that is Mike's story plays out throughout the decades as he plays in the band Social Distortion. They come from a very chaotic kind of band that was, destined for failure, pretty much, when you have most of the band is drug addicts and, are in and out of jail and stuff, or can't help but steal everything that they see, to a band that hits rock bottom, gets in the system, comes back out, learns how to adjust, but also use that past to write great songs and have creativity that kind of drives him, in this case Mike, and his partner Dennis Donnell, who played guitar for many years in the band, drives them forward into progressing a sound that was not just the music that they heard in bands that they heard from England, bands like The Damned, or bands that were like, or other bands that came from New York, like the Ramones. All of the bands in Orange County at one point were emulating somebody else. And they had to figure out a way to take what they were hearing from across the pond or across the country and like turn it into something that mattered to them, and try to figure out a way to relate to kids, no matter if they grew up in Fullerton or they grew up in some other place. So they wrote that's how you write a great song. It's relatable to anyone. And so we talk about that as an evolution of the Orange County sound, which gets it right in a massive way. When you look at later bands, like we mentioned the Offspring, we talk about No Doubt, and to an extent, even though people don't normally ascribe them to OC, we talk about Sublime a fair amount in this book, because Brad Knoll, this is a band from Long Beach that kind of combined reggae and punk rock and hip hop and things like that. But Brad Knoll, the singer of that band, who passed away a long time ago in '95, he was born and buried in Orange County. So that's a thing that, again, growing up in a certain area in a certain time, and you have a mixture of this great scene of music, plus like the skateboard and surfing and all of the things that people think about when they glorify the Orange County or Southern California beach existence, or think of it in that sort of abstract way, not even about Orange County. They think of it that West Coast sort of mystique that drives people out here, and clogs up our freeways. These are the things that people think about, and they found a way to kind of harness that and put that into a sound. And so that's a huge element of what we talk about, and then you mix that with what we talked about earlier, which is like the venues, Linda's Doll Hut, Cuckoo's Nest. We talk about Safari Sam's in Huntington Beach. We talk about Ichabod's in Fullerton. These are all names that you guys, I'm sure, are going to Google later, and it's going to be amazing. And how a mixture of adults in the room, kids on the street, fans who just needed a place and something to identify with, all sort of came together in these sort of very unlikely ways in an area that didn't really want them. Orange County was not digging punk rock the way the inner cities were, maybe in LA or other places. It just wasn't, it was basically kind of an affront to the existence of what people thought of when they think of like, suburbia. So when you have so much great culture that you want to get out there, it can't always stay in a bubble. It's got to like break out. And so that's why the name, again, Tearing Down the Orange Curtain, kind of kept coming back as we were coming up with titles for this book, because I don't know, that's what you do when you're trying to waste time and not procrastinate, like I don't really want to write today. Let me think of the title of this book, and it was actually one of the first ones I wrote down with Dan, and we kept trying to beat it, but I think the theme kept coming back, and so we just said, hey, I think this is it. So, we talk about all of the things that sort of lead up to the major commercial boom when the world sort of discovers Orange County, with the Offspring, with bands that were popular on like the Warped Tour, which is another thing we talk about, and coming like around 1995 is when ska also starts to emerge. So you have your No Doubts, which the one band, right? Who is it? The one band that you knew back there. So you have bands like that, and say Ferris, and who grew up with the punk rock spirit as well, but kind of translated that into their own way of, their own interest in music, which was ska music, which came from Jamaica. And so we talk about how that culture and that scene sort of unlikely sort of like finds its way, but it also doesn't seem like too much of a stretch. Island culture meets beach culture in Southern California. It feels like a given. I don't know. With the exception of maybe the ska scene in like New Jersey or something like that, it's kind of the biggest place you can think of when it comes to like Southern California and ska music. And I think there's a reason behind that, which we get into in the book. Essentially, throughout this whole thing, we talk about all the links, all the ways in which Orange County plays a role in the advancement of popular music throughout the 90s. And so we take it all the way up until about the year 2000. And why did we choose to stop there? We were tired, honestly, right? I think anyone that knows about this scene knows how much information, how much music, how many bands, how much. We interviewed over 100 people for this book, and I think that was probably maybe like, just scratching the surface. There might have been 20% of the bands and people we could have talked to. But books got to get finished, and I think that was a major thing for us, which was to figure out how to distill the most important information we could about the area in a way that told a story, that kept characters that were constant throughout the book. And we call them characters. We refer to them that way. They're musicians, they're rock stars, they're legends, they're our heroes. But in our book, they're our characters. And we had to figure out a way to tell a story that maybe felt disjointed in parts, you had to bring the parts together. And so for me, that was the fun part as a writer who's been in journalism for like 20 years now. I couldn't get up every day to write a page in this book if I didn't feel like I had some kind of incentive to want to care about the people in it beyond the music that I was hearing. So for me, that was a driving force on top of just feeling so much like pride in where I'm from and how I grew up and feeling like an outsider for a big majority of my life, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have felt at some point, especially if you're into punk. Like, that is why you get into it, because you feel like nobody cares, nobody understands you. Well, loud music's fun, you want to have fun with your friends, and you make something that's immediate, that's raw, that feels passionate, that feels like you feel inside, which is what a lot of the people we interview in this book who are on the cover of this thing, who've sold, collectively millions and millions of records, they all felt that same way. And then, of course, there was bands that a lot of the world just never really got to know as well. Who remembers or recognizes the name the Cadillac Tramps? Oh, damn. Wow, you guys are schooled. Okay. I'm not telling you anything new in this book. Yeah, so a band like the Tramps, every band on the cover of that book opened for them. Every band on the cover of that book wanted to be the Cadillac Tramps. Gabby Gaborno was God. Mike Gaborno was the singer of the band. He's one of the best frontmen to ever exist in Orange County for sure. There you go. So, I mean, without bands like that, this book doesn't really matter very much to me, because I am of the opinion as the local guy in this. My partner, he's from New York, excuse him. I was very adamant about talking about the bands that were not going to get their own story. Bands that I might have written about at the OC Weekly for years and years and years, and people around here know who they are, and it seems like a given. But for the band, or the people that were maybe going to see Pearl Jam in the 90s, and this band opened up, and they're like, wow, these guys are awesome, who the hell were they? But they never really followed up, or they saw them tour, but never heard a record because their records sucked. They just weren't good at recording. They were great songs, but the problem was that they didn't have that thing that was allowed them to transcend beyond being a really great live band, which is hooks. Musicians in the room, to hook a chorus, something catchy, something that makes you want to go out and buy that thing right away, that record. So they had great energy and they had amazing presence and all that stuff. But really what's important about them is that they show this evolutionary step in that punk rock is about change, right? It's about growing, evolving, and getting outside of yourself and being able to incorporate other things around you, how you see it, reflected outside into the world. And so they did that. They combined so many different genres, blues, a little bit of like I said, metal, I said punk and Western, all this crazy stuff that shouldn't go together, but it does. And you can go back and revisit some of that stuff and kind of feel nostalgic about what music kind of used to be when there was really no rules, there was no algorithm. There was nothing really telling you what to listen to next. It was all about, hey, this sounds cool. Why don't we put that with this and see what happens? And so that's kind of the spirit of what I feel like Orange County music has always represented to me, even if I didn't know all the history or wasn't around in '86 or wasn't around when a lot of these bands had come and gone. But the good thing about it is that I think a lot of you know who are here, judging by how many hands have been raised throughout this entire 30 minutes, these bands are still around. They're still, you can bump into them at the supermarket. You kind of see them at shows, you see them at events. They're still playing. We were just at how many people went to the OC Punk exhibit in Fullerton? Okay, yeah, so that closing event that they had recently, Agent Orange headlined it, and they play all the time. Bands, like I said, I mentioned Offspring. A guy like Noodles, the guitar player who's on the cover here. This little guy, Little Noodles. He's actually very tall. They're all, very tall in that band. But, he's at every show I've ever, anytime I go to Orange County, a punk rock show in Orange County, at the observatory or wherever, I bump into him, So that to me is the essence of punk too. It's there's a centrifugal force that keeps bands here because I think that force is probably their moms, their family, because that's really the difference between a scene like LA or New York and Orange County is that there are, it's a family-oriented place in that, people didn't come here to be famous. They came here to raise a family, most likely. Like my parents did. I really didn't understand what the hell my dad was thinking. I'm like, you're black, man. So I had a really interesting upbringing myself, but it was to me, I felt very at home there because my family is there, and I travel all over the world. I do different things. I always come back here right now, and I wrote a book about Orange County, which is like, again, I work at the LA Times. I've done every kind of journalism you could do, pretty much, but to me, it was always about music, and it was always about punk rock at the center of it, and so to me, that was. I know I've said to me like 10,000 times tonight, but it was very much a part of trying to figure out who I was and appreciate that while I'm writing this about people who meant so much to me in my development. So, I think the book doesn't suck. I think it's pretty good. We got written up I'm gonna, toot my horn for a second, but we got written up in Wall Street Journal last week, which was like weird to see a picture of like Dennis Donnell in the Wall Street Journal, with his face all smeared with like whatever he had on his face, like playing guitar, and got written up in Rolling Stone, and LA Times, magically an article appeared. It's really awesome to see, because I think as we get out and this book, the message of it gets out and everything, people who were in the scene, who were really a part of it, it's shocking, but it's also pretty cool, because again, I don't think, just like a museum exhibit happening in Fullerton, nobody really considered that was ever going to happen. Books happening, documentaries, things like that are, posterity, ephemera, things that people, you go to see that stuff in museums because it's like it's been around for 1,000 years and nobody really thinks about it anymore, unless you go to a museum to see it. But punk rock, the spirit of it feels eternally now, and so that's why I think that this book resonates with kids who are younger and kids who are older. So with that, I'll open myself up to questions if you guys have them. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
I know that when I think of punk rock, aside from the music, I'm thinking of hair, razor blades, black clothing. Can you address how that kind of evolved?
Yeah, we can talk about that. So like this guy has like creepers on. You want to show people your shoes? And yeah, and they got some docs on, like shoes, like subtle things like that, like the type of shoes you have on, an earring. I mean, those aren't subtle, those are pretty, you can see those from a mile away. But I think part of the thing was, it didn't just all of a sudden become that. I mean, you had the style in London that evolved, that kind of like captured the eyeballs of America, because they're like, whoa, these guys look like freaks, they look like aliens, But I think the difference, again, when it got to the West Coast, it was people would go to stores like London Exchange, which was a big store,
Electric chair.
I was getting to electric chair, man. Come on, give me a second. Damn. Step it up, man. Pura, yeah. Okay, well, we can shout them out. Why don't we just do that? What stores did you guys go to when you were young? Fashion? Huh? Stray Cat, okay. Zack Attack.
I worked there.
How did we not interview you for the book? Yeah, I mean, there was definitely some points of major interest that were the flashpoints of where people inherited style that came down from other, like I said, whether it's London or New York, and then you kind of meld that with like the beach style, and it becomes a different thing. More like it's a little more subtle, fashion-wise. I think one of the things that Mike Ness sort of said, which whatever he says, I kind of tend to believe, even though it's kind of probably shouldn't. But it's just like, you could see a kid who just had like a pair of peg pants and a dangly earring, and you already knew that kid, his lifestyle was the punk rock thing. So you would sit there on the bus and start talking, well, what show are you going to go see tonight? Oh, what records did you get? Whatever. They would just start talking. It was just an unspoken language. So that's what fashion really is. And so we tried to weave that into the overall narrative of what this scene was about. And again, it was really, the essence of the book is it's not just told from the band's perspective, because the bands were loaded. They were drugged out a lot of times, or they were not. They were too close to it sometimes, and so we needed people who were business owners, who were, they would be like the modern day influencer, people who were kind of a little bit outside of it to kind of talk about what was really going on, record shop owners, all that stuff. So to answer your question about the fashion part, how it evolved is because really there weren't really any rules, and so they kind of just made things up as they went along. And there are things that kind of caught on and stayed, and some things that kind of came and went in the fashion sense. And so, but you can go to any show today and sort of like see somebody dressing like they did back in, 81, which is kind of cool, I think, and it is the kind of reminder that all this stuff just comes back around. So, anybody else? All right. So
I've got a question about how did the punk movement in Orange County navigate the racism? I really want to know this as a person who of colour myself. I'm also from Australia, and we have our own punk traditions there as well. I've been out here since '94, so I consider myself a Californian. But I really want to know about how you navigated racism here, particularly in areas where, before American History X came out on the movies, where we saw, it was, everyone was like Costa Mesa, Huntington Beach. How did you? That's kind of the cauldron of this this movement. How was their acceptance, non-acceptance, the Oi movement as well in punk? How did that all kind of swirl around in the miasma of punk in Orange County?
Well, I'm really glad you asked. I start every answer that way, so it sounds like I know what I'm talking about. No, but I actually kind of do. It's kind of funny that we're talking about this because I am half black myself. My dad actually taught at Cal State Fullerton. He helped start the African American Studies program there as one of my majors. I majored in Afro Studies and journalism, and I don't think I could have written this book at least without touching on it somewhat, without him coming, because sadly he passed while I was writing this book. It was really a tough thing, but I couldn't imagine him reading this without acknowledging. It's like, why didn't you talk about this, that, and this? And which is ironic because he moved us here. I was like, what are you doing? You grew up in the segregation, you grew up in actual racism. Why would you move to Orange County? That was my thought growing up because I got made fun of in school. I got called the N-word and all that stuff. And so to me, a lot of that backdrop of Orange County that you're talking about, it was there, and we talk about it, in terms of what a lot of people sort of ascribe to the negative connotations of Orange County when it came to, this mosh pit, slam dancing, and then a lot of the aggression. You had all of a sudden people were, skinheads that were kind of beating up on people in the mosh pit and things like that. That all happened. We talk about it in there. I think how we addressed a lot of that was by showing counterpoints. So part of the thing that has frustrated me about covering Orange County for a long time is that people tend to look at it all one way. And I, as someone who's not all one way, thought of it as you cannot do that, right? And so part of it was you have to pay attention to what's going on, but then you also, in terms of sort of the negative aspects, and then you also have to look at some of the examples that counteract that. So yes, you had certain bands that were like that, but a lot of those core bands that we've been talking about for the last half an hour weren't like that. Why? Because they were Mexican, or they were people of color that didn't normally get Steve Soto, half Mexican. The Agnew brothers, half Mexican. There's only Tony Brandenburg, he's half Mexican. So Gabby Morno, I could go on, but I think that part of it was just not only was the racial component sort of important to address in terms of like the underlying backdrop of why some of these bands were super talented and why some of those racist bands, a lot of them sucked, you know? And, like, I would say part of it was like, I've always been of the opinion that like, I want to focus on who's moving things ahead and not who's dragging them down. And I think I owe that to a lot of the bands that are part of this, to not lump them in, but to show a clear division between. And that's why there's not a whole lot of stuff in here about the skinhead movement, in the sense that this is about the sound and the music. There were definitely, I mean, we talk about it when we get, especially when we get into talking about like the Olympic Auditorium and stuff, and the LA scene with, you know, Gary Tovar created Golden Voice, which is a big, you know, company that now is huge, massive, you know, has created major festivals like Coachella and stuff. But back in the 80s, when he started, you know, he had these punk shows that were tremendously huge. And so you had people come from all over the place, and a lot of those people were not nice. A lot of those people had, you know, maybe prejudices and things like that, and we talk about that, but there was also, like I said, for the amount of people that could be classified as that, there was also just way more that were not, and that's how I kind of reckon with it. And we get that question like almost every time Dan and I like talk, that's why I said I appreciate it, because at the end of the day, anyone who thinks that, you know, they relate to the racist history of Orange County punk can read a book that was written by a black guy and a Jew. So there you go.
And there were Nazis in Berkeley.
There was Nazis everywhere. I mean, they're everywhere. But the point is, to me, I feel like there is a book about that can be written that I personally did not care to write. I definitely did talk about it in the context of as the scene was coming up, but to me it was like less important to do that and more important to talk about how like different people from different socioeconomic backgrounds were found each other and found a tribe and found a scene that went beyond what they ever thought it could be. And to me, that was the main focus of the book. So, yeah. Anybody else? Come on.
What was your first show?
Who asked it? Sorry. My first show. Okay. So I'll just say my first punk show, because it's gonna be weird if I say my first show. My first show was like the Art Laboe show. I went to like, you know what I mean? My dad took me, and I love funk bands and stuff, so I saw Zapp and Parliament and all that stuff. That was my first show. I was like, wow, that's, like, why are those guys naked up there, you know? But my first punk show, beyond some of the like local shows I went to, I think my first real one was the Vandals, and it was at the Ice House, I believe. And to me, it was with them. I knew that it was a little bit scary, but it was mostly fun. It was like a pop punk thing. Like I said, a lot of the stuff that I kind of went on to listen to was influenced by what I heard from the Vandals, because it was fun, it was approachable, it was loud and aggressive and stuff, but it wasn't mean, you know, like they were just having fun. And so that felt like an easy entry point even then, even when shows were still a little bit scary to go to, but it wasn't bad. Like I thought the energy was great, and like seeing a mosh pit for the first time, seeing it open up, actually seeing that and like going in it, and then not coming out. And swirling around with a bunch of my friends and crashing into people I'd never met was to me like the greatest feeling ever, I think. And I remember came home from that show, and like I said, my dad, you know, is an older black gentleman from the South who has no concept. Like I say punk music to him, or punk anything, and he thinks a totally different thing, you know. And so he's just kind of like, what the hell is this? But I came home from that show, and he was sitting there at the table waiting for me to come home. This was probably like, I don't know, after midnight. He was always stayed up late. And my shirt was torn. I had like a little bit of blood like here or something. I had, you know, I don't even know if I had like I don't even know if I had like my left shoe. I was just walking in I'd just been through it, but I was smiling. I had a super big smile on my face. And he's just like, where have you been? And I was like, oh, yeah, we just went to a show. Like, yeah, what's no big deal? Like, you know, I'll clean this up. I won't let mom see me like this. And he's like, you look like you had a good time. And I think that was the difference with me about coming home that way in other scenarios where I'd maybe been in a fight or something like that where I wasn't having a good time, you know? And he saw the difference in me and was like, hey, I understand, I don't get this, but I understand it. Just tell me next time where you're going, you know? And so that was my first real show, was with the Vandals, so yeah. Anyone else? Hey, what's up?
So, instead of the alcohol and drug addiction, what other struggles did the bands face when they were coming up?
That's a good question too. I mean, again, I think the one thing with Orange County, especially in those early years that we kept running into as we were interviewing so many people, was just that punk rock itself was just not accepted by the masses. I mean, going back to the story we were talking about with Cuckoo's Nest, does anyone know about the other bar that shared the parking lot with the Cuckoo's Nest? What were they called? What was it called? Starts with a Z. Yeah. They were not into punk rock. That was a bar that was basically the antithesis of what was going on at the Cuckoo's Nest. They were very redneck, whatever you want to say. Construction work, cowboys, whatever. I mean, it kind of gets taught, because there's a bit of like a stereotype with them too, of it being a cowboy bar. It wasn't quite that. It was more like a working class, like construction kind of type of scenario. Like there was also another bar called the Crystal Saloon that was more of a cowboy bar. But whatever the case, they did not like what was going on at the Cuckoo's Nest at all. And so we talk about, there was them trying to beat up on punks that were coming in and out of shows. There was always fights. There was always things going on in that parking lot. It was like the Wild West. And then you also had hippies did not like those. Hippies were very, I mean, I'm probably talking to a few in here, but the nice ones. There was some not nice ones around at that time, still in the mid to late 70s, that were kind of talking about, that were still beating up on punks and stuff. And so they weren't really, beating up on bands like TSOL, because they were like, 6'3", 6'4", huge guys, right? But in a lot of ways, those type of scenarios, they had to face that in a way that maybe some of the inner city bands in LA maybe didn't have to do that as much. I mean, there's always other things going on in a big city, crime-wise, that create an unsafe environment. But in the suburbs, it's kind of like, if you don't fit in, we will let you know. So that's kind of like the main thing that we talk about early on with respect to obstacles in the scene. Anything? Yeah?
I just want to make a comment. I really appreciated reading this book because I'm a little bit on the younger side, like I was a kid, in 1980, like 83, 85. So I grew up listening. My cousins lived in Fullerton. I had an older cousin who was very influential. He would, we were kids, we were listening to disco records, and he would come in and say disco sucks. And he would put on things like institutionalized, and so here I am going screaming, I'm not crazy,
Yeah.
Pepsi.
Right.
Stuff like that. So it filled in a lot of holes for me
Uh-huh.
of stuff that I didn't really know about what was going on like at that time. So that was really cool for me.
Yeah.
And then kind of me getting older, One of my first shows, if you would, that wasn't like parental supervision, in high school in '88, I ditched high school to go see No Doubt at Cal State Fullerton.
Oh, okay.
And that was just a lot of fun, and then got to see them like house parties and things like that, which was cool, kind of growing up in Anaheim and being a part of that scene going on. But there's just so much of this book. It was just really fascinating. So
Awesome.
Thank you guys for
Thank you.
going so deep into this whole like subculture that I never really knew like the history on.
Can you tell Amazon?
I just finished it, so I will write it with you.
That's another reminder to people that have read it, like yourself, or are gonna read it. When you do read it, if you like it, please leave a review. It does help us sell more books, but also it does help, I think, illustrate for people why they should pick it up. I didn't become a journalist to read the comment section, but it's with us now. I think one of the things that's positive about this is being able to, stuff like this and coming in and talking to a room full of people now we're buddies, but I didn't know you guys 35 minutes ago. Is just to kind of have the conversation about why this book relates so hard to so many people and what's special about why you should pick it up and all of that. And I can't necessarily do that to the world, And so I think that what's important about it is you have these stories and things that you have your own personal experience, and then you can be able to find a way to relate to someone else's. And that creates, narrows the gap in terms of how we feel dissimilar to each other. And that's one of the things that punk rock did for me, was that it cut through a lot of tension, because you could just talk about the music, and you could talk about the scene, and then get to know someone, but you actually had something to break the ice. So yeah, thank you for your comment. Okay.
In the process of writing this book, has it opened or given you any inspiration or of going off on a different angle, or going into something deeper, or a part two, or?
Yeah. No, I think that's, I feel a little bit like an artist that records an album and puts it out, and people are like, so what's next? I just did this, man. No, but no, to your question.
A side note or something like that?
No, to your question, no, I actually, so in this book we talk about a specific festival, which I mentioned, and sort of midway through the book, that has roots in Southern California that we want to kind of examine a little more thoroughly at a timeline. And that to me feels like a way to keep the conversation going, because we stopped this book at the year 2000, which again, that's right when I was getting into music, basically, as a teenager. So a lot of this stuff is I wasn't around, or if I was around, I was baby, So, but because it was important to me, I picked it up, I internalized it, it colored my whole musical development. But the stuff that came after that, let's say 2000 to now, that's a whole book that encapsulates a lot of different other sounds that go beyond, it shows the evolution of punk and the spirit of it, but it's not all punk music. So that's the next phase, I think, of what we're looking at, and hopefully, a documentary or something, So if I circle back, if I have my own envelopes, I come back here and, ask for some donations to get some funding going on. Anyways, that's my next project will be based on something that we already wrote about in the book, yeah. Sorry, there was another question.
I just wondered if there were any new bands you'd recommend today, either from Orange County or California.
Yeah, that was one of the fun parts about working as a music editor at OC Weekly for a long time. While that was still around, it ended, closed in 2019. And, but to me, the bands that kind of kept that scene alive were bands like The Garden, that kind of their dad played in bands, played a lot of the early bands and stuff, and or bands like Fiddlar, which they're two brothers again that were in the band their dad played in TSOL, and so like they're, you know, doing their thing. There's a lot of great bands that were sort of offshoots of the scene, of the culture and everything. And then there's a lot of bands that had nothing really particular tied to it, but the spirit is similar. And so to me, even bands that kind of, like I said, this scene, this sound kind of like went all around, you know, the country and the world and stuff. So you could listen to a band like Turnstile, which a lot of your kids probably know. That band borrows so heavily, I feel, from like the Orange County sort of vibe in terms of the guitar, the aggressiveness, but also like the catchiness of music and stuff. So there's a lot of those type of bands, and then, you know, there's in the ska world, you know, bands like Bite Me Bambi that are like ska from Orange County, you know, that kind of
Suburban legends.
yeah, suburban legends, and so there's a lot, and I spent a long time writing about all those bands, and what's cool about it is like this basically is a way for me to feels like the culmination of a lot of my life writing about these, you know, this scene, this place, and showing appreciation for it, but also just showing it for the good and the bad, because I think that's also important. That's like the way you can really honor anything, is by showing its faults and still finding a way to love it. But yeah, to your question, there's a lot of great bands, so.
Can I add on to that real quick?
Yeah.
3 out of 4 bands he just mentioned play the Garden Amp and Garden Grove regularly. If you follow their page, you can go see all Bite Me Bambi, The Garden, Turnstile.
Yeah.
And it's a small, cool venue.
It's a local, independently owned venue, which is not easy to do in 2025, so. It's good.
Would you say that there's an Orange County sound? I mean, this, I find, you know, being an outsider and coming in and listening to the music here, it's much more influenced by rockabilly, and that's not something that heavily influenced Australian punk.
Mm-hmm.
It's also heavily influenced by ska here, not necessarily like the Teddy Boys or stuff like that kind of music that was heavily influenced by bands like the Clash. But definitely those are the two kind of sounds that kind of jam those together, and it seems like a very Orange County sound. Do you recognize that there's a separate Orange County sound?
Well, I think in the context of this book, there is definitely what I would describe as like an Orange County sound, being like I said, the catchy sort of like melodic punk rock that was very different from like sort of the, you know, the brash stuff that was going on in you know, LA at the time. Like it was just different. But at the same time, what's unique about a lot of those early bands is they all sounded different. Until there was a couple things, elements that kind of wove it all together. Like I said, the surf rock guitar like of Agent Orange, right? I mean, that could only exist in an area that has surf. You know, you're not gonna hear that coming out of like Denver, you know?
But Sydney has surf, and we don't have the same kind of music.
Don't disagree with me, sir. No, but anyways, no. To your point, it's not just the location. It's not just the elements. It's the location. So like the Beach Boys thing, the surf culture, all that stuff that came from generations before. Like one of the things we talk about before this scene really takes shape is like the culture that came before. We touch on like the Golden Bear and like the Rendezvous Room and Dick Dale and all that stuff that was part of Southern California, Orange County specifically. And you can't, I think part of this is you have to, whether you want to or not, you internalize things, elements of where you're from. And if that's what's going on in the background, that's naturally where you're gonna pick up. One of the things that also is unique about this place is Fullerton, the fact that like Leo Fender, the Fender name, all that stuff, that originates here. So part of like the proliferation of punk was like kids going and like dumpster diving like behind like the Fender factory for all like the cast off guitars, picking those up and learning how to play, you know, Rickenbacker and Santa Ana and all this different stuff. Like there's so much musical history in Orange County that doesn't really get talked about enough, but it still comes out. It's just that people don't understand. Like, again, like definitely people who are like my age and younger don't know. And that's one of the things that I'm in that millennial generation that's kind of in between, where I feel like, you know, when I started going to school, there were no cell phones, and by the end, they were everywhere, type of thing. And seeing things like, you know, just technology, like the internet and stuff was coming as I was just coming up. Like, and so a lot of the stuff, a lot of the information that I could get was still primary source material from people like in record shops, so people who owned stores that wanted to have conversations with me. So I, you know, would buy something and get out of the store, hopefully, you know. But like also, that stuff doesn't really exist as much anymore, as we can all kind of attest. And so having this, even if kids don't really read, there is an audiobook of this. So like you can actually listen to it and get some information about where you're from. And I think all the bands on here, even though they're, like I said, been around for 30, 40 plus years, the world still knows them. So you'll get some attention because of that. And you open this book and you realize there's a whole bunch of bands I never knew existed, you know, or maybe I thought I knew about them, but I didn't really. And so hoping to share some of that knowledge with people through this in a way that they may not want to go and do what we did and go scrounge through a bunch of stuff and find old magazines or go talk to Jerry Roach up in his weird desert shack, you know. Hope he's not here right now. So we did a lot of that work so that you guys could read this. And I appreciate you guys so much for sitting. Oh, we have a question.
How long did it take you to write the book?
Good question. So we wrote the proposal for this book in 2019, right before the pandemic. We had big plans about what we're going to do with this thing in 2020. And 2020 had other ideas. So Dan and I, just a quick background, like we met when I was a music editor at OC Weekly. He was freelancing for me. We kind of got into like a friendship, and then we wound up, after I left there, we worked at the same place for a little while, like an industry trade publication, which shall not be named because it was terrible. And we both hated our jobs. We were looking to leave. We were trying to like do anything we could to kind of escape where we were at. So we said, well, while we're pretending to work here, let's do this book. That's something we have the conversation about. Has anyone done a book on any of these huge bands? That some, like I said, all the bands on here are multi-platinum, diamond selling, major acts around the world. So has anyone done a book about them? They haven't. Or if they had done anything, it just wasn't done in like a book form that was like easily digestible and encapsulate the whole scene. And so we're like, okay, let's, you know, take some free Wi-Fi from this company that we don't like working for and just like type out a proposal. So we did that. And then in 2020, it was like, I don't think we're gonna have Civilization tomorrow, so why don't we just put this on the shelf for now and try to get through and see what happens on the other side. And so when we emerged from that, we came back around and picked it up, and we've gotten an agent, and within 3 months we got a book deal. So it was like really fast. I still don't know how, but you know, I think part of it was that the editors at Hachette got it, they understood, because there was the fondness for the music that they'd grown up with in their own lives. And so then we started writing it. Once we got the book deal, that part, it was 18 months. Yeah, which isn't a lot of time. It feels like a lot of time when you say that, but it's actually really not a lot of time. And so what we did was mathematically, in my head, I was like, okay, once we got through interviewing so many people, it was like, okay, the writing part, the fun part, no one wants to do. We came up with like kind of like how much we had to write per day, each of us, to hit a deadline. And you know, we eased into it. So like, you know what, why don't we just write each 200 words a day? Don't judge me. 200 words a day. That's like the length. I mean, as a journalist, I'm on deadlines all the time. I write short stories, or I have written many short stories like that. That's like a blog post a day. So I was like, all right, we can do that. So we kind of started slow like that. And in my case, I woke up in the morning before I had my morning meetings and all that stuff, and I would take an hour out of my day to like write a little bit on that, or maybe at night or whatever. And so we built it up and up and up, and it was kind of like chiseling our way out of Shawshank. You know, we were just trying to like get out slowly, get out from under this huge deadline, this huge pile of words that we were responsible for, which was, in case anybody's wondering, 400 pages of a book like this is 120,000 words. So there you go.
Okay. Well, if everybody joins me again for saying thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, can I tell people I'm going to be signing?
Oh, I'm going to tell them right
Oh, you're going to tell them.
Yes.
Okay.
So Nate's book is here in the back, and he's happy to sign them and dedicate them to you. If you'd like to buy a copy, please. I just thought I would throw in a little personal thing. Gwen Stefani's uncle was my first boyfriend.
Make one out to him.
Yeah. And thank you for coming. I just wanted to remind you, if you're interested in our tour to Little Saigon, there are sign-ups, registration flyers in the back, membership if you haven't become a member yet. And next month's meeting is, the working title is To Live and Die in Santa Ana Canyon. So we have snacks in the back, help yourself, and don't forget to turn in your name tags. All right, thank you very much.